Today I'm going to change out the horn on my 2001 Ford F-250. Now the other day when I went to use the horn, it had a muffled crackly noise, and so I knew it was time to change out the horn. Now I went ahead and picked this one up online. I'll put a link in the description on where I found it. Morning! In the meantime, we got to find the horn and get it changed out. Now on this truck, it's in kind of a hidden location. It's on the passenger side, down between the fender and the splash well. So there's a plastic splash well we're going to have to take out to access the horn. So we'll get started on this now. There's a few bolts I'm going to have to remove. We've got an 11mm bolt on some studs holding some hardware underneath, as you can see clearly right here. So we need to take those bolts out. Those are 11mm. We need to take this 8mm bolt, and then these smaller bolts are 5.5mm holding in this plastic splash well. So we're going to get started on that now. And then we also have another 8mm bolt up underneath the front that we need to get to. So now that we've got those loose, we can go ahead and pull out this fender liner so we can access the horn. Oh, I see the problem. There's a bolt that I've missed right here. It's kind of hard to see. Explains why it's a little hard to get to. It's another one of the 8mm. Gonna need my extension again. All right. And now the horn assembly is about right here, but the bolt that holds it in place is right down here next to the battery. So we're going to go ahead and have to remove the battery. So we want to start and remove the negative cable first. It's an 8mm. We'll get it off out of the way. And this is an aftermarket cable connection on the positive side. So it's got a 13mm. We'll loosen that up and get it removed as well. You can see what that goop is. That's just dielectric grease to help prevent corrosion. Anybody that watches the channel knows I'm a big fan of using dielectric grease. So anyways, in the battery hold down is another 5/16 or 8mm size. We'll remove the hold down. Get that out of the way. Ooh, and we'll search for that under the truck here in a minute and pull the battery out. All right, and now that we've got that out of the way, we can go ahead and remove the bolt that holds the horn in position. It's another 8mm or 15/16. Put the bolt right here. And now, after that work, I'm able to access the horns. Now, instead of the dual horn setup, I'm just going to install a single horn, because that's basically all I need, just a good horn that's loud enough to pass inspection. And the one that I've got is called the Freeway Blaster, so I figured that should do the job. So we'll go ahead and get this moved over. Well, that's interesting. This is both the same name brand horn, a Fiam. I'm not sure if that's the way you pronounce it. Looks like it's got a couple of pegs on there. It doesn't have the clips to hold it in the back like this one does. Let's just see what the fitment's like. Close, but not gonna do it. So we're gonna have to wire this one in. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put this horn back on. I use this, take off this horn location, and then I'll use the factory wiring to these connectors to wire it in. That way I can still use the factory connector. So we'll put this horn back on. We'll plug it back in. this horn. Connectors. Now I'm going to get a little screwdriver and I'm going to get some blade connectors so we can get that wired up. All right, so I've moved this over to the workbench. It is extremely hot in Texas. We're going through a heat wave, which we have pretty much called summer, all summer long. Right now it's extra hot because it's humid and nasty. So anyways, so I'm moving this to the workbench. Got to take this connector off. My goal here is to try to retain factory wiring plug, factory wiring and mount without the factory pricing of having to buy 2 new factory horns here. So that's our goal. So we're going to leave this horn in position along with the factory wiring connector, and then we're going to plug it in right here. So going to mount up the horn. Make sure my connectors will reach here. And so what I'm going to do is use my tools here and cut the wiring connector. And then we're going to strip off the insulation. We're going to give the wire a couple of wraps. And then we're going to use this connection provided with the horn. Put our wire in there. But you want to see, make sure that the wire is here to the end of the area that needs to be crimped. And then we're going to use a crimping tool to crimp that together. Give it a good solid crimp. And then we're going to give it what I call a little yank test. Make sure that it's not coming off there. I have seen a lot of people that do wiring repairs and they don't get the crimp right, and they'll just leave it alone, and you can go in there and simply pull that apart, and you're just asking for that component to have a failure as soon as it hits a couple of good hard bumps. So you always want to test your connections after you perform your installation of the connector. So now we're going to cut this one off as well. We're going to trim back the wiring insulation. I always like to give it a twist. That always helps the wires stay together when you go to put the connector on. And then we're going to put the connector on. And this is a very good crimping tool. As you can see, there's a seam right here, and then there's a divot. I want to put this divot on the opposite side of that seam. Like that, and then I want to make sure that the wire is centered in the middle of that metal before I crimp. I'm going to give it a good hard crimp again, and then I'm going to pull it, do the pull test, make sure that it's secure, and then install it on the connector. And now we'll go ahead and tighten this horn down. All right, so I'm going to be able to reinstall this horn assembly. Like I said, they were both weak. I just need a good loud one to pass inspection. I'm going to be able to retain the factory bracket and the factory connection and get this installed. So now all we have left to do is install our connector, install our mounting, put the inner fender back in and the battery, and we test our horn, make sure we're all good to go. So we'll head back out in the heat and get started. See, here's that factory connector that I was able to retain. So we're going to go ahead and install it back on there, get our horns going in, and We've got this mounting bracket, which is in kind of a tricky location up here. So we're going to just try to get it shoved in. You see you've got that little tab you've got to stick through the hole, and then you want to get the threads lined up with the hole where you can see them. Once you do that, you can install your bolt. Again, that's an 8mm. So we're going to grab our 8mm socket on an extension, put it in with my Milwaukee ratchet, which I have just absolutely loved this ratchet since I've purchased it. Makes jobs much faster, and it'll get into tight areas. And we're going to secure that down. All right. And so now it's going to be time to install the battery. And before I do that, though, I do want to do a load test on my battery. It's been out there in there a couple of years, and it's a good time to do a load test. I've checked the voltage with my ohm meter. It's at 12.7 volts, so we know it's fully charged. And I've got my little battery load tester, and so I can hit the button on that, and I can see that we're still above the 800 cold cranking amps that it's rated at for 750. So we know this battery is good to go. So we'll go ahead and get it reinstalled in the truck. And when you're installing a battery, you always want to make sure to do the positive lead first. That way, if you use your wrench and you touch a ground, nothing will happen. But if you touch a ground with the positive after you have the negative hooked up, you're going to have sparks and possibly some welding, depending on what part that you touch. So we're going to go ahead and get this installed. Tighten up our 13mm connector. If I had the right size socket here, we'll get the 13mm socket. And then, now this truck has an aftermarket alarm on it. These F-250s are quite popular, so I wanted to make sure it had an alarm on it. But when you go to install your battery cables, sometimes the alarm will go off. So you have to have the keys in hand ready to go. To shut that alarm off. All right. So far so good. We're going to try to make contact while we tighten this up. Hopefully the alarm won't sound. All right, we got lucky. But you always want to have those keys ready to disable that alarm. All right, do another test. All right, there we are. So now we want to go ahead and put in our battery holder, which fell down here on the ground. It was nice enough to fall towards the front of the truck, so it was easy to grab. And we're going to go ahead and tighten that connector down, the bolt. Now we want to test the horn, make sure that our horn works. Okay, very good. Got a nice loud horn. So we should be able to pass the inspection. So now all we have left to do is reinstall our inner fender, and then we're good to go. So we'll get back down here. Get this fender installed back into position. Filmed with the iPhone, and it got so hot out here in the sun here in Texas that it got overheated, so I had to give it a break. In the meantime, I got that inner fender wrestled back in there as the best I could describe it. It's plastic. You got to move it around there till you get it lined up. Get your 5.5 millimeters, your 11 millimeters, and your 8 millimeters back installed. Got the horn in place, works. Tested our battery while we were in there. It's all good to go. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the product so you can find it if you need to. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.